Hi everyone, this is Christy from Paper Hoarder Disorder. This is video number 3, part 3 in a series, 3 of 3 I believe, in a series of how to decorate your chipboard pieces, your die-cut chipboard pieces, using typically Big's dies, Ellison's and whatnot. Sizzix, thick dies to cut your chipboard. And so on this one, we've already done nail polish, we've already done acrylic paint, we've already done heat embossing, and we've also done glitter with the Xyron. So now we are going to do the metallic rub. Now this one is made by Viva. It's Inca Gold, and it's called metallic rub. So on this one's just gold, and that's what I did these with. Now on this first one, you'll see there's a big difference between these two, even though it's the same color. This one is a dry rub, and you can see how you can see a lot of pitting in there, and it makes it look kind of that hammered, pitted finish that you get with old metals. And so that's a really neat look, and I love that. But I also wanted to show you what it looks like with a more solid look. Now still, even with that, I still make sure that I leave just a little bit of black showing through because it gives it a bit of realism. Let me see if I can zoom in. So you can still see the teeny little black pieces here and there. And these have already been shined up. Basically, how you do this one is you rub it in there, you let it dry for 5 minutes, and then you come back with a paper towel and you buff it to a high shine. It's very similar to a product called Rub and Buff. Now, the big difference between that is Rub and Buff comes in a tiny tube, and I would show you mine, but I have no idea where they are because I don't use them anymore. Well, actually, maybe I do have them somewhere. I might not be able to find them. I know I had them, but I don't use them because they give me a headache. They're very, very, very smelly, and they can give people migraines because the chemicals are so very strong. They also come in a tiny little tube, and they tend to dry up, which is a real waste. And at 5 something a piece for these tiny little tubes, wasting 2/3 of it can get quite expensive. The metallic rub by Viva, this is water-based. So if these dry out, even if they dry completely to where they're just hard, they should be a cream base. You can see how creamy this is in here, and it just rubs right onto your finger. I'm going to go ahead and do it now. But if this starts to dry up, all you have to do is add a little bit of water and let it sit. Now sometimes it'll take days, and sometimes you'll have to go through and poke little holes so that it kind of gets all over in there. You can even stir it, but it can get a little clumpy when you stir it, so I tend not to. If I don't have to, I'd rather let it sit for a week rather than stir it up and have it all clumpy because it just triggers my OCD, I guess. I just get a little too freaked out about the whole chunky. It's just the texture of it, I guess. But they can be reconstituted. I have heard a good tip that you can take a baby wipe, and you can just take a wet baby wipe and you can just put it right on the top of it and put the lid right on there. And that will help keep it wet and help keep it moist when not in use for long periods of time. But you can just add water to them, so there's no waste. And look at how big this is. So this is probably, I think these are $7 or $8, so it's a little more expensive than the single tube of Rub and Buff, but it doesn't give you a headache. It does not stink up your room at all. You can use your fingers with it, you get a lot more of it, and you can reconstitute it. So wonderful stuff. I can't tell you how much I recommend this. It's just fun to play with. And, you can really buff it up. It has beeswax in it, which is why you can buff it, and it gets that real smooth and shiny appearance to it is because of that beeswax. It works really, really well. That's why the buff part. comes in. That's where it comes in. So anywho, I'm just going to go ahead and this one is a tiny bit dry, but it should work just fine. So you can see I barely have any on my finger. I did not scoop into it. I just rubbed my finger into it. So on this, I'm going to use a really light touch because you can always come back in and add some more. And you can see how very, very little you need. You can see how it's already coloring that. So you can always add more. You can't take it away. So when you do buff it, you will buff off a little more. You will buff some of it off, should I say. And so you want to keep that in mind. So you want to go just a tiny bit heavier than you want your finished product to be. But just a little bit. So all we're doing is exactly the same thing that we did with the nail polish and with the acrylic paint. This is just considered kind of a dry brush. And on this one, I really do like to get into the sides because it really gives that metal finish. And I don't have to get into all the little crevices in there because that black showing through, you know, really helps to sell the whole, it's metal, not made of chipboard kind of thing. So really, really wonderful, super fast to do. So this one is done. So look at how great this looks. Let me show you up compared to just the regular chipboard. So that's what we started with, and this is what we have in just a couple minutes. So quite cool stuff. If it will zoom in, there we go. You can see a lot of that pitting, and that really makes it look natural. So let's go ahead and do one, and let's do it completely solid. So on that, let's go and punch that little hole out. So if I want to do it solid, I'm just really going to, I'm going to get a little bit thicker, but not too much. And this one's going to take a little longer to dry. Now you can see I'm getting it on my fingernail polish, and you do have to get it off of your fingernail polish because it will stay on there. It will, it doesn't just wash right off. Once it starts to dry, it will stay on there. And so you don't want to really rub it onto your mat either. You probably should have a paper towel underneath this while working to protect your mat. So this one is far more solid, but again, I'm still going to leave a little bit of black through there. So you can see, if you can see, come on you. Sorry about the moving around, but it's important to see the detail. It's all these pieces are so much about the detail. Come on you. Well, you can't hardly see it because it doesn't want to be seen, obviously. You can see it a little bit. That's kind of in focus. You can see just tiny little bits and pieces here of that black shining through. And let me go ahead and put this one up next to it so that you can see the difference. So there really is a big difference. Okay, so we're going to let these dry. Actually, it's focusing a lot better now. So we're going to let these dry, and then we're going to come back and we're going to buff them in a later time. About 5 minutes time. And again, this is something that you can clean up with just a wet wipe. Get one out. All right. So as long as you get it quickly, you can see how it started coloring my fingernails. So if you want copper colored fingernails, you know how to get it if you don't have copper polish. I don't know exactly how long it would stay on, but I know I have ruined my manicure more than once with it. So, okay, so that's all cleaned up. Nice, easy cleanup. And that was just the copper. So our last technique here is using the glossy accents, or as I used on these, is the crystal 3D lacquer. So now on this one, it was just put onto the black. And on this one, I glued on, before I cut it out, I glued on a piece of pattern paper, and then I cut out the chipboard and the pattern paper at the same time and just covered it in the glossy accents. And you can see how lovely. Now this is one single coat. And I have had people ask me in the past, I probably should have inked up that white core, but I didn't. It doesn't stand out too awful bad, though. It doesn't bother me terribly. But this is the Marion Smith paper that I have underneath here with these roses in the pink background. Anywho, so I've had people ask me before how I get the glossy accents so thick and so shiny and so, you know, to where it doesn't pool to one side or the other. And I didn't really understand what people were talking about. And I have found out since then what they were talking about. And it's because I'm completely addicted to chipboard. If I have an embellishment, I will never just cut something out or just fussy cut something out and just put it onto a page, or just try to glossy accent just a plain piece of pattern paper. I always put it on chipboard, or I always put it on 1 or 2 layers of tag board, or I'm always backing it with something so that it's very stiff and it has some dimension to it. And so I've never had any problem being able to get this level of thickness off of one shot of doing glossy accents. Well, shortly after I was asked that by a couple followers, I had taken an old graphic 45 line communique, and I had to cut out the pen nibs. And when I went to glossy accent them, of course they started curling right up. They were too fine to put anything behind, and so I just cut out the paper. Well, they started curling up, and I'm sure that a lot of you have experienced this. Well, I started understanding what everybody was asking, and so I found a solution to that. So there's 2 ways to go on this. Well, there's actually 3 ways you can go. A, you can do like I do, and you can put it onto chipboard and cut it out and sand it down, or onto chipboard or tag board and cut it out. You can do that, and it won't curl because the chipboard or the tag board is strong enough and is going to hold. It's stronger than the want of the glossy accents to curl the piece. The chipboard's stronger, so it's going to keep it nice and flat, and it's not going to pool, and you can get it nice and thick. So you can either back it like I've been doing for the past couple of years, or you can do this. And this is what I came up with. I messed around with this a little bit. So you can take, for example, now this one's already been glossy, but I had it handy. Now you can see how tiny this is. This is just cardstock that was cut out, and before it was glossied, I took it and I ran it through the little Xyron. So you can run it through the Xyron machines and you get it completely sticky on the back. Now then you're going to have to stick it down to, see, this is a medium weight chipboard. You can see that this is about 1/16 of an inch thick. This is much thicker than what is on the back of a pad of paper, okay? This is at least 3 times thicker than what you have on the back of a pad of paper. This is stiff stuff. I mean, that's as much as it's going to flex. It does not bend in half. So this is medium weight. If you're using the back of, if you don't have access to this, then you can take probably 2 pieces of the back of a paper pad and you can glue them together and get the same effect, because you'll have the 2 layers of the lightweight chipboard plus a whole layer of glue in between them. And so that should be strong enough to hold and stay rigid. So once you have the sticky on the back, if you don't have a Xyron, I did test it, and you can use it with your ATG, which makes me think that you could probably use one of the little tape runner, like the snails and whatnot, to do the same thing. But what you want to do is you want to stick it straight down too. I tried to do it with I tried to tape down parchment paper and then stick it to that so it'd be easy to come off, but the parchment paper will try to curl because it's not strong enough. So you do need to stick it straight down to the chipboard, and you need to really get it down on there. And once it's really on there, then you add on your glossy accents. You can see these two have not been glossied yet. So these have been stuck down. They're stuck down really well. I'm going to glossy accent them, and then as soon as they're dry, then I'm going to come by, and I prefer, I have a silhouette, but I do prefer this scraper to the Cricut scraper, because this one actually has a thinner blade instead of being a spatula. It's almost more like a knife. But you would just get underneath there and you just lift it up. And if you take a little bit of the chipboard with you, like you can see I have here and here, don't worry about it. At least your piece came out good, but you can lift this up and get it off of the chipboard. And then, typically speaking, you still have sticky on there so it'll stick down. Of course, you know I recommend to always use glue. Don't ever don't ever rely just on the dry adhesive. So if there's any pieces sticking through, you just rub them through and just make them to where you can't see them. But that is how I deal with getting glossy accents nice and thick onto something that doesn't have a thick background. If it's just the pattern paper, that's how I get the glossy done on there. So also, I wanted to show you there's another way you can do it, and that is to glue your cutout. Now, this was cut out on my Cameo, and I glued it directly to the cover. And then I came in and I glossied it. Now, on this lettering, it tends to take, in order to get a real high gloss on here, this took 2 times. So I put it on there one night. I let it dry for, you know, at least 8 to 10 hours. It seems dry after probably about 3 or 4, but I like to give it more time if possible. So I usually do it just before I go to bed, and I don't mess with it for a good 8 or 10 hours. So this had 2 coats on it. So this one was 2 nights. But it does work really well. If you do kind of go over a little bit, people think that I'm really risky. It's risky to do it right on your project, but it really isn't. I mean, once you put it on there, as long as you've got a steady hand, if it goes over a little bit, I just use my little that little scraper that I had. And if it starts to go off to the side, I will just scoop up and wipe off any that goes where I don't want it. I just scoop it off. And I take my time to do it. So you can do that. Now, here's an example here. Now, on these scrolls, these were cut out of chipboard and out of the pattern paper and glued together. And this is a single coat of glossy accents. And see how much thicker this looks than even the cover, which had 2? It's because of that chipboard underneath, and of course, because it had chipboard underneath, I did not have to stick it down to anything when I glossy accented it. So there are some helpful hints, tips that I have come across that I figured out because I love chipboard and I love my glossy on my projects. So on this one, we have here, again, just like the scrolls, we have the pattern paper on this one and just the bear on this one. So I will just show you very quickly. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to show you exactly how I apply my glossy. So let me go ahead and zoom in here, and I will get a scrap piece. And a lot of people ask me exactly how to apply it, and I just tell them to trace the edges and fill it in. But that seems like it's not quite enough, so I'm going to do for you just what I've done for them in class. And I will show you up close. Let's see if I could even get a little closer. I know it's a long video for just glossy accents. Or, well, no, that's not true. It was the Inca Gold too, the metallic rub. Let's go ahead and zoom in one more time. And I hope that some of you find this helpful. I've been asked to do this quite a few times, so I'm just going to make sure that we do it upright. Okay, so now on here I have my 3D lacquer, and I have one of the metal glitter tips on here, the same as what I use for my glue, and it works just fine. I like the precision I can get with it. I like the tip on there. Now this metal tip will not fit on the tiny little glossy accents, and I find that it doesn't get clogged as often. Now, it's always a good idea to start over here. You see how there was a big bubble came out of there. I don't know if you saw that. But you want to keep constant pressure. You don't want to keep on sucking air back in there. So once you start squeezing, you have constant pressure on there. And so all we're going to do is we're going to put it nice and thick. Now, when I'm going around and I'm kind of doing these little swirls, I'm moving it around to make sure there aren't any bubbles in there. That's another thing I should tell you, is that I get nowhere near the bubbles on this, even with the same techniques as I do with glossy accents. So that's another big benefit. And so you can see here that I'm kind of tracing the edges, and then I'm coming back and I'm filling in. Now I won't go all the way around the edges because it starts drying on those edges, and sometimes it doesn't fill in evenly when you do that. So I trace the edges first, but only in a small localized area, and then I fill in. So I just do it in sections. I don't do a full outline. But you can see how quickly this goes on there. And it's just real easy to get this on there, and it's starting to go off the paper. And I get real close to the edges. Oopsie, and on that one I went a little bit off. Down here on the corner, I'm going to scoot it back. And that kind of took care of it. But had I not moved it around on here, I would just scoop this up and I would wipe it off. If this were on my project, for example, I would just scoop it up like this, what I started with. I just scoop it up best I can and move on. And I always wipe it on my hand because I can always get that off. Even the glossy accents. And if you're using glossy accents, you know it's hard to get it off of your skin. You really should invest in one of the little scrubbers, the little scrubbies from Ranger. They're $5 and they just last so very long, and it takes the ink and all of the like the Tombow glue that you can't ever seem to get off, and the glossy accents, that takes it off just so quickly. Okay, so on here I see that there is a, you may not be able to see it, but on this one you can see, nope, you can't see it, but there is a tiny little spot where it didn't quite cover, so I'm just going to add in, again, it tried to do, I didn't start it off, so it tried to do a bubble. So I'm going to just try to pop that bubble with the metal tip. Oopsie. Get back on there. So I'm going to just push him back in there. And if you do have this is a teeny tiny little bubble, you want to go ahead and pop those. Now every time you pop a bubble, you have to wipe off your tip. Looks like we might have one there. And you want to do it really quick before this starts to dry. So every time you pop a bubble, you need to wipe it off. Otherwise, it's going to kind of push the bubble around. So you need to start with basically a dry tip every time. So let me go ahead and show you that, and that will be, here we go. And so you can see how very thick this is on that chipboard, and then you just let it dry. Put it in, I suggest that you get you designate an area of your craft room or wherever you craft as a drying area somewhere up high that doesn't, I usually put it to where it doesn't have an air vent directly on it, because sometimes when the air kicks in, it can blow your project off. And, you know, just like peanut butter, it always ends up face first down. And if that touches on your carpet, you might end up cutting cutting it off of your carpet. You might be cutting away a whole patch of carpet away. So be aware of that, but keep it nice and level and away from being able to be blown away with doors opening or whatnot. You want to keep it away from the doors, away from the vents, and at a nice level surface. And then you'll just have a real easy time doing glossy accents. And I hope this helped everybody. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to ask. And oh, there's one other thing I almost forgot. I'm going to clean off my tip here and put my pin back in. We have to come through and we have to buff out our pieces, and there's really nothing to it. Let me go ahead and show you real quick. So when I do these metal pieces, you know, I tend to do a lot of them at a time, but it's not something that you have to. So I'm only going to use part of this. I'm going to use half of it to put my project on and half of it to buff, because I don't want it rubbing off onto my mat. So all I have to do, you can see it's kind of dull right now. And so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put good pressure. Now, when you're creating that friction, that heat, that's when that beeswax is going to kick in. And it's really, you know, you see the mark that we left? We don't want that on our craft mat. That's why there's the paper towel underneath, is because that's going to try to come off. Now this copper is coming off a lot more than most of them do. So this one I might have to redo. But it still does look quite neat because it's taken a lot of it off. But basically you want to rub it until it's kind of shiny and to where it stops coming off. Okay. So that got a, well, it doesn't really look shinier by much. It got a little thick right there. And I'm probably, like I said, this one came off more than usual, but it's still really beautiful. It looks even more antiqued, which I do like. And so I might actually leave that one just the way it is, even though that's not what I had intended. So on this one, we're going to, again, the same thing. We want to create that heat and that friction in order for that shine to come through from the beeswax. And that's also going to, you know, keep it from rubbing off, any kind of excess rubbing off onto your project. So it doesn't take too long. You definitely want to make sure you've got that friction going, though, like I keep on telling you, because that's key. You can't just rub it lightly, and if it doesn't start feeling a little bit hot underneath your finger, then you're probably not rubbing hard enough and fast enough. So this one looks pretty good. And you can also just take it and you can rub it between your fingers to kind of finish it off and get the edges and just buff it. Just like you're buffing something to a shine. That's exactly what we're doing. And so here you can see it is much shinier. And this came out really well. This one came out a lot more pitted than we started out with, and so I like it a lot. So that is just about perfect. So anywho, that is how we do, let me go and show you both of them. That is how we do the metallic rub for the Inca Gold. So again, if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to ask. And I hope you guys enjoyed this little series on how to decorate your chipboard pieces. Thanks so much. Bye.